Okay, welcome everyone to today's drought webinar. I really appreciate you all joining on time. Before our presenter begins, I'm going to go over some webinar housekeeping and other information related to the rebate and the Water Authority drought indices. For today's webinar, mics and cameras will be off for the duration of the presentation. Speaker adjustments can be made where the arrows are shown. Meeting chat, mics, and cameras will be disabled for this webinar. Now, given the amount of information that's going to be covered today, it's unlikely that we will have time for questions. However, if there is, we will try to relay those to the presenter. In the meantime, if you have some simple questions, I will do the best I can to try to answer those within the Q&A tab that you will see on the screen in the lower right. If you have more involved or detailed questions, please send those to our Ask an Expert email address, and one of us will get back with you within a couple of days with a more thorough answer. And I will display that email address in some subsequent slides, so you don't have to write that down right now. So the last thing I want to point out today is that with regards to housekeeping, is that our presenters will cover a lot. Judith, our presenter, is going to cover a lot of information today. In the case that it happens to go over 1 o'clock and you need to leave, we will keep going, but you can leave and still receive the webinar rebate. So again, if you need to leave at 1 o'clock and we're still going, never fear, you will still get the rebate. Although we encourage everyone to stay and receive the information if you're able to. All of the rebate credits for those of you that qualify will appear under the total adjustments row pointed out by the top arrow. Rebate credits unfortunately take a while. They can take 2 to 3 billing cycles or up to 90 days. You don't need to do anything else in order to get your rebate if you do indeed qualify. We have all the information from your registration form. And if you have any questions, feel free to give us a call on our rebate hotline or send an email to our Ask an Expert email address, and I will put that information up on a slide here shortly. So we are, as you all know, we are in a terrible drought. Things are bad out there. The river is really disheartening. Now, it's a little bit confusing because despite the map on the right and the extreme drought conditions that we are facing, the Water Authority has its own drought stages that are based on, indeed, the US drought monitor indices and a couple of other measures, such as our current community's water usage, which is measured in gallons per capita per day, and our current groundwater production goal. So given those three indices, you can see that we are currently in what we refer to as a drought advisory. There are several measures triggered by the drought advisory, and these include a 24% increase on advertising expenditures. We are customizing our promotion materials to raise awareness about the current drought conditions. And as you all are taking advantage of today, we are hosting these educational drought-focused webinars where qualifying customers can receive a $20 rebate. Now, the Water Conservation Program is trying to take advantage of the increased momentum, urgency, and partner messaging around the current drought in order to help increase about our operations so folks can foster a deeper understanding about where our water comes from and what we are doing to ensure that we have a sustainable water supply well into the future. Now, I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with our operational processes in terms of having both water available when it's available from the San Juan Chama project water that comes to us via the Rio Grande and our aquifer, or our savings account, as we like to call it. Now, in times of low river flow or no river flow, we are forced to rely on our aquifer or savings account, and becomes particularly important for everyone to conserve water or use it in the most efficient way possible, because that is the water that our great-great-grandchildren will be relying on. Speaking of the future, the Water Authority is extremely progressive in terms of long-term future planning. In fact, we are the only water utility in the entire nation to have a 100-year long-term water supply plan. This doesn't mean that we're out of water at 100 years. That means after 100 years, we still have a sustainable water supply. And all of this information is documented in our planning outlined in our planning document titled Water 2120. There's a great video that you can watch that talks about this process. And every 10 years, we go through an update process where we incorporate the latest climate models and population numbers, as well as a bunch of other information. So this is a living document. And in fact, we're in the process this year of updating that, and we'll be releasing some copies and having public meetings about that coming up this fall. Also, the drought affords us an opportunity to highlight a couple of ordinances we have related to water conservation. These are the time of day and water waste. So I'm sure most of you know that we should not be irrigating between 11 and 7 with sprinklers. And if you happen to see water running down the street or anything else like that, please report it. We rely on all of you to help report those areas of water waste, and then we will reach out to the owner, give them a warning, give them a chance to get that fixed. No one actively wants to waste water or have a really high bill. So you're not ratting out your neighbors. You're helping them to be notified that they have an issue they're just not aware of. We have some great resources, and just a few of them that I'd like to mention right now, and please encourage you to explore more. And we will be sending a follow-up email next week that will have some of the resources that we're talking about today and our presenter will be discussing. We have our popular xeriscape guide. It can be downloaded as a PDF, and we will start having those available at local nurseries in a hard copy. It has details on over 600 plants, so it's a great place to get started. We also have a irrigation guide that has all things related to irrigation. It's a thorough resource that if anyone has any questions about irrigation, it's a great place to get started. You can also download that PDF. If you haven't already been to it, our 505outside.com is the Water Authority's landscape and gardening and rebate website. Please check that out. Scroll to the bottom, sign up for our monthly email newsletter. We have local landscape experts penning several articles a month along with the plant of the month. It's a great resource and we promise not to share your information with anyone. So with all of that, it's finally my pleasure to introduce Judith Phillips. Judith is one of the Southwest's most respected landscape designers, garden writers, educators, and advocates for sustainable outdoor spaces. For more than 3 decades, she has helped homeowners, landscape professionals, students, and communities create beautiful, resilient landscaping using native and climate-adapted plants. She's the author of several acclaimed books, including Growing the Southwest Garden, Plants for Natural Gardens, and Natural by Design. Her work has inspired countless people throughout New Mexico and the Southwest to garden in harmony with our unique environment. And you can see my copy here is really well used and full of page markers. So I encourage everyone to check out these great resources that Judith has created. And Judith may not appreciate this nickname, but I've long considered her the fairy godmother of xeriscape in New Mexico. Sorry about that, Judith. I think it's true. And many of the landscapes, plant palettes, and gardening practices we see and promote today have been influenced by Judith's decades of leadership, researching, teaching, and advocacy. And today's topic, plant adaptation to change, which plants are most likely to transition to hotter, drier times, couldn't be more timely. As our region faces increasing temperatures and ongoing pressure on water resources, understanding how to create landscapes that are both resilient and water efficient is more important than ever. Judith, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your knowledge and experience with our community. We're incredibly pleased that you agreed to be part of this webinar series. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Amos. And where do I get my magic wand? I could use one of those. Where? Okay.
Let's see.
Yeah. Okay.
There we go. That looks correct.
Good. Great. So I changed the title slightly because I'm not going to talk about necessarily really specific plants, because with so many people listening, you've got so many different situations that I don't want to um, narrow it down too much. What I'm going to talk about is just general practices and strategies that can actually help plants survive better in the changes that we're dealing with. And and that's where the magic wand comes in, because choosing plants now, I used to be fairly confident in making plant choices, and now I just wish I had that magic wand. I'm going to start with a doom scroll of the reasons that or the things that we're dealing with, kind of the background of what is creating the situation we're in. And I don't think I need to say much about reduced snowpack this year, because I think everybody is well aware of that. But the impact of earlier snow melt on actually the water in the river and also groundwater is cumulative. So the more years we have with low snowpack, the more difficult the situation becomes. That leads to drier soils, and the soils are becoming drier not only because temperatures are warmer, evaporation rates are higher, but plants actually are pulling more water out of the soil than they had been, and there's less water in the soil for them to access, and so that creates plant stresses. You may find yourself having to water more often or longer in a cycle than you used to make up for, especially when it's windy, to make up for the moisture losses. And then when we have these incredible uh, storm events, they tend to, this was the lower left-hand image was sort of my backyard in 2000, I think it was 2002. That arroyo that I thought I knew very well was running 4 feet deep in chocolate, kind of milk chocolate like water, and with roiling waves that were turning over on each other. It was amazing and really scary. And then the uh, other thing that is creating uh, erosion problems globally, actually, at this point, are the fires, the catastrophic fires we've been having. And you may think that that doesn't have any impact on you immediately, but it does, because it can change the way water in the watershed moves or doesn't. So is it a wet year or is it a dry year? Well, every year is a drier year. And that's because the transpiration rates are higher because of the increased heat. So this is a view of Albuquerque's immediate watershed. The heavy blue line running down the middle is the Rio Grande, and all the small blue lines are the uh, arroyos that contribute one way or another at times into the flow in the Rio Grande. And Albuquerque sits in the middle of this as a I think of it as a concrete oasis. It's, the potential for harvesting rainwater off all the hard surfaces is enormous, but the reality is Albuquerque, the footprint of Albuquerque is not able, the soil is not able to absorb nearly the amount of water that it used to, because the surfaces are paved over. Um, so there are all kinds of ways that you can take advantage of this, and some of them can be, like the middle image, quite artful. And it actually, when plants are dormant in the winter, there can be patterns on the ground that are interesting. You can, as the images on the left show, you can be more kind of precise in the placement of the stone that line the channel, and or you can make it look more natural, like the images on the right. But anything that you can do to take the water off the roof and off of paving and put it into green spaces is going to benefit the plants and keep things cooler. Part of our problem with heat, aside from the just general heating of the climate, cities are becoming much hotter because of all the heat absorbed by the paving. So I like there's people are talking about cues to care, and that when you're naturalizing a landscape, you want to give people cues as to the fact that this landscape is being cared for. Just small maintained areas that actually are obviously cared for. The my take on cues to care, though, is also from nature. Boulders in the Sandias harvest a lot of rainwater, and they recycle it as condensation for days after we have a rain event. And so the plant community is generally denser around larger boulders. And this is a site, a project that I worked on the east side of Albuquerque, where the boulders that were removed during construction were then stockpiled to put back in place afterwards and make these terraces that actually help to prevent the slope from eroding. And also all the decomposed granite that was on the surface was skimmed off and stockpiled, and then it was reapplied as mulch once the planting was done. And the image on the lower left is the first spring after the mulching with the reserved decomposed granite was done. Desert marigold just came up everywhere, and it was just, there still have been desert marigold there, but that first flush of marigolds was just such a great surprise and a gift. When you're going to be considering harvesting rainwater, and also when you're considering plant selection, you need to think about the soil that you're planting into. And the image on the top left is really heavy clay soil that was really compacted. And after several months, nothing germinated on that site, which is, definitely a signal that you've got trouble in River City. And so the solution here was to, and this wasn't my solution, it's much more engineered than I generally like to see more surface flow activity than, but because of the compaction of this site, the trenches were dug and they were lined with landscape fabric, which is what landscape fabric actually is intended. It's not a weed barrier. It's intended to prevent sediment from infiltrating different drainage systems. And so there was a perforated pipe dropped into these trenches that was wrapped in the fabric to keep the pipe from filling up. My thing about these engineered solutions is you don't know they're not working until then it's obvious they're not working, and then you've got a problem usually. Except that if this buys you several years, probably at least a decade before that happens, you have plants in place by then that actually their roots have opened up pathways in the soil, and their roots have really helped create a better growing situation than you began with. And so if you go to the image on the right, that's soil that is pretty much undisturbed. I like walking in arroyos because you can actually watch, you can see the roots growing down and see how deeply they go, and from a distance, the way roots travel through soil that has not been compacted or or damaged in any way. The image on the bottom left is a shout out to those of you from Placitas. I'm sure you recognize this soil or lack of. You dig a hole here and and you don't have soil to put back in it to transplant. Um, and then but the soil is permeable, and that's a plus in this situation. And then on the right, that's very sandy soil that was scraped actually to do some construction, and the construction never happened. It was interesting to watch the recovery there, and it was mostly native grasses and some of the roots of the shrubs that were there to begin with that have started the recovery process, but is also very permeable soil. This is that excuse me. This is that site with the boulders in the front yard. When I was working on the left, the slide on the left, when I was working on this project, I actually woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, having this image of a boulder running downhill and rolling into the street and crushing a Volkswagen. And I thought, well, I don't think I'm going to use boulders to stabilize the side there. So gabions were the tool that was used there. And that's just a wire mesh basket that is filled with stone, and that filters uh, the water running through it. It doesn't stop the water, but it filters the water running through it. So a lot of times sediment will build up behind the gabions, and they're used actually in arroyos to do that too. When arroyos are down cut, if you run gabions through them, you can actually build the soil back up to more closely resemble what its original flow was. But the image on the left is reinforcement for the cutleaf sumac that was planted there, that is intended to root sprout and hold the soil together, but it wouldn't do it entirely on its own with a heavy flow of water. So the gabion is meant to reinforce the root system, so the two of them working together. The image on the right are gabions that are done with smaller mesh soil or mesh wire, and they're just more attractive than you weren't going to see the gabions on the left. The gabions on the right here are a stair step up the slope, which is sometimes that can also be a more economical way of dealing with moving people through a steep, retaining the soil and then moving people through a steep area. So then another thing to consider after you've considered the soil and the runoff is where you need shade, and then where rainwater can support the trees for shade, and are they going to be trees, or do you need to build a structure and plant a vine, because transpiration off the leaves is going to make it cooler, so it's better to actually have a green surface rather than a hard surface, at least in part. This is the image on the top is, a vine shelter. Partly that was also done because within 30 feet of the, oh, oh.
Oh, we're switching mics because apparently there's something wrong with this one.
Okay. Oh, we're back. Oh, excellent. Oh, yeah. We had a bit of a technical difficulties. It's hard to keep me quiet, and apparently they succeeded here. Um, anyway, so images on the bottom are trees planted in, one is in a runoff basin that is also, it doesn't heat up because of the native grass ground cover. And so it provides a better growing conditions for the tree. And then the one on the right actually has a gabion that is trapping some of the runoff, and it's not working again. Uh,
The sound is working.
uh,
Okay, that looks correct. Thanks, y'all.
okay. Okay, so the other thing to consider is how you want to live in those spaces and whether you have time and the space to grow trees. So here again, there's a combination of built shade uh, and this is also the opportunity to provide sort of living space that you can look out into the landscape from. The image on the bottom right, I put the umbrella image in there partly as a, kind of a cautionary tale. You really need to have an umbrellas with really heavy bases and then close the umbrellas when it's windy. Or I actually one time saw an umbrella folded and skewered through a swamp cooler on the roof of the house next door. So umbrellas can be kind of iffy. So then one of the issues that is increasingly an issue is reconciling the water needs of plants, shallow rooted, needing frequent watering versus deeply rooted, less frequent watering. Ideally, you zone the water lines differently, or you capture enough runoff to compensate for some of the difference. There are ways of doing it, but it's becoming more difficult to do. In this image, these fruit trees were buffered by the threadgrass underneath them. And the threadgrass can be weedy. The reason that we sort of felt it was not going to be an issue here is because the basalt fines that were used for the paving really seem to suppress weeds from growing in them. And then also it's bordered by a lot of pavement. And so there wasn't any place for the threadgrass really to migrate to. But what that does, then, there's a netafim soaker tubing all around for the tree roots and the grass. The reason that that grass was chosen is because it takes almost no water, and so most of the water is going to the trees. And then the other thing that we did here was we added soil sponges, and the soil sponges are sort of a variation on the French drain theme. French drains are holes dug and then backfilled with rock to help infiltration to eliminate some of the standing water issues. And while that is okay, and in certain situations it's the best option, of where you're planting plants, it's actually much better if you can provide the plants with something that essentially becomes an in-ground cistern, but also helps improve the life in the soil. And soil sponges are holes dug, usually about the size of a 5-gallon growing container, backfilled with a combination of actively, so living compost, shredded wood to feed the compost, and then some pumice to maintain drainage. And actually, this graphic was the idea started being promoted by Jim Brooks when he was the owner of Soilutions, and the graphic is done by Michael Young. The two of them collaborated on a lot of rainwater harvesting scenarios, and this is, one of the best ideas. Partly because, as you can see from the circled areas, the microorganisms in the compost start moving out into the surrounding soil, and ultimately they attach themselves to the roots of the plants nearby, and the sponges act as just that. They're a way of getting water into the ground quickly and keeping it there until plant roots can access it. So then, besides considering the movement of water through the site, you need to consider how you're going to move through the site, and your friends are going to move through the site. And so pathways become a really pathways, I find from a design standpoint, are really important because they also lead your eye through the site, and they can be in a climate where a lot of our vegetation goes dormant in the wintertime, and now some of it's going dormant in the summertime too. This gives you kind of an anchor. This gives you the framework for the planting alongside it. It can also help support the plants alongside it. So a permeable path is definitely the way to go. And then, besides your friends, your actually human friends, who more than human might be visiting and even staying to nest in your landscape. There's charismatic wildlife like the hummingbird on your right, and then there are like the spadefoot toad in the middle. There are different forms of wildlife that do you great service that you don't even most of the time know are there. And then there are upper right the hawk, and lower and upper middle the hawk, and bottom the tarantula. There's what I guess you could consider to be non-charismatic wildlife, but they also have a huge role to play in the ecosystem of the place you live. And so insects are your friends. There are so many more beneficial insects than there are pests. And the beneficial insects are partly beneficial to us because they control the pests. And so if you go and start eliminating the other life than human life from a site, eventually you start health-wise eliminating your pets and human life from the site. So you really want to encourage as much life as possible. And there's, the New Mexico Backyard Refuge Program is an excellent program for a list of plant species that foster various wildlife, and the expanded list, if you go all the way to the far right column, you will get an idea of what those plants, who those plants serve in the landscape. And so it's a really good resource for those of us who live in this area. So then, starting from the top down, consider tree size and the benefits and the constraints of the trees that you're considering. Really large trees, I think in the future, are going to become much more of a liability than an asset. Partly because plants and trees are giant siphons, and if the plant can't pull enough moisture out of the soil to get to the top of the canopy, then the tree starts dying back from the top down. And rather than having a tree canopy that looks really singed, you can maintain a green canopy with less water if you choose smaller smaller trees. But there are also, you know, other things to consider, like the soapberry in the bottom right. That's a beautiful tree, kind of slow to get started, not the easiest tree to find available. It's wonderful for pollinators, but it drops these ultimately it holds on to them for a long time, but eventually it will drop gumball size fruits that are like ball bearings on the sidewalk. So you just need to, place the plants where they're going to be a benefit rather than a liability, or consider benefits versus liabilities, I guess. The one of the things that I think is becoming more and more of a consideration is the large shrubs that we or the large shrubs that we use for trees. And a lot of people think that desert willow in the middle there is a tree. Well, it's actually a large shrub. Physiologically, the difference is shrubs store their energy for growth in the root system. Trees store a lot of it in the canopy. And so who's got a better savings method? Somebody who's storing their resources where they're easy to tap but hard to be accessed other than by the tree, or having your assets waving in the wind. It's uh, and people sometimes will think that I don't like large trees. I love large trees. A tree canopy can be my equivalent of a cathedral. But are those trees going to be healthy? And I don't like to hear the trees moaning for lack of resources. Uh, anyway, the some of the large shrubs, small trees that are uh, are really good bets, I think, for the future are honey mesquite and the middle upper, and then fragrant ash in the bottom left. And I'm kind of we don't have emerald ash borer problems yet, but if we do, this is a native ash, so theoretically it could be vulnerable. But I'm wondering if, because it's really more of a shrub than a tree, it can be pruned up to be, tree form, but technically it's a shrub. Maybe there aren't enough resources there for the ash borer to be to think it's worth infesting these trees. That's my hope. Anyway, again, that magic wand would come in really handy. And the bottom right is a netleaf hackberry, and that's a really important pollinator plant. It's the larval host for some butterflies, and the fruit is a real wintertime asset for overwintering birds. It also has a really interesting, in its adolescence, it kind of looks like a bad hair day, but once it gets past that, like you see in the image on the bottom right, it has a really nice open canopy. The light filtering through it is really pleasant. And then trees are kind of the upper deck. Stacking benefits, you want to include things that are going to allow you the screening that you need if you need screening, a sense of enclosure if you want that, gaps in the enclosure if you want views out, and then food and cover for wildlife. And all of the two plants on the left are native roses, fern bush up above, and Arizona rosewood down below, and both of those are just alive with pollinators while they're blooming, and they have a fairly good, especially the fern bush blooms for quite a long time. And then the sumac on the upper right, and actually all sumacs are really good bird food and also bee food when they're blooming. And then the female New Mexico olive can be just a real treat for songbirds in the neighborhood. And then again, stacking benefits. You want you want to include color and fragrance and texture and food and shelter. And I just included these images to give you an idea of just how many beautiful options we have here. And this is just just scratching the surface. Most of these plants are native. Actually, the Ladybank's rose, the upper middle, and then the blue ephedra down on the bottom right are not native, but there are actually there are native ephedra that could be used instead. And then plants that are related often occupy different niches in ecosystems, and so they have different adaptations, and you can take advantage of that. If you know where they're native, you can kind of try and apply that to your landscape. And so those are 4 oaks up above that occupy different niches. The plants in the middle, the plant on the left is a lead plant that's an amorpha that is a plains and prairie shrub, small shrub, and on the right it's the riparian amorpha, false indigo. Both of them share the same benefits in terms of habitat, but they occupy really different niches in the landscape. And then the 4 sunflowers down below, the one on the left is the annual sunflower. The other 3 are perennials. The one in the middle left is Maximilian sunflower, which is on the wetter end of the xeric spectrum. And then the other 2 are really very arid adapted. The desert mule's ears in the middle and skeleton leaf goldeneye on the right. All of them are incredibly important sources. Sunflowers are considered a keystone species for wildlife. And actually the oaks on the upper go back there a minute. The oaks I also included the oaks because oaks are a keystone species for wildlife. So diversity being the stability of an ecosystem is also the stability of designed landscapes. If you concentrate multiple, in order to have an impact visually, you need to have enough mass there in order for it to read as coherent. Also, if you're trying to attract pollinators, you need to have enough mass there to attract pollinators. But you also need to have enough diversity there to sort of weather any kind of climate issues that you're going to run into. And again, the reason I put this combination of images is just to show you that there are just so many options available. And we'd be here all day if we were going to talk about every single one of them. One of the things that is becoming I think more important is actually doing. A lot of people are reluctant to try and grow things from seed, and on the one hand it can be more difficult now to get things started from seed, but plants that seed themselves in are a whole lot more resilient than plants that are transplanted actually throughout their lifespan. This is the rail trail. It's 1 block long in my neighborhood, and I really think they did an excellent job on the landscape for this. This was the landscape architects that planned, did this really cool seeding of, I was walking through here in the wintertime and I saw um, the California poppies germinating, and I thought, well, this is really cool. They also used, I think, 10 different species of tree in this stretch of 1 block long, rather than doing a monoculture of repeating the same tree, which sometimes is sort of a hallmark of landscape architecture. This is a combination of trees that, and it's already attracting all kinds of winged visitors here. It's very cool. So volunteer plants, volunteer plants are plants that come up from seed that you didn't plant. And they can tell you a lot about your site, about the health of it, about where you are actually. If you know something about if you identify the plants that are coming up and you know something about, you look up, what their preferred habitats are. But they can also be really beautiful assets to the site. So it's really a gift. So why not just take it? You also don't have to water these plants because they wanted to be here on their own. They weren't planted. Which brings us to another issue that's going to become, it already is, it always has been, but it's becoming more important, is the provenance of the seeds and the plants that you're planting. Really, the more local, the better. A habitat goal is 70% native plants, and most landscapes are just the opposite of that. If you've got 30% natives in there, it's something. But I think in New Mexico, in the West generally, we do better with planting more natives than they do in the East and Midwest. But seeds of plants that developed on the site they've got 10,000 years of evolution behind them genetically, to make sure that they're really the best option for that site. And on this site here, we mowed the area that's the grass area in between the trees there, and used it on the image on the lower left, that's the pathway up to the front door, and that also is the leach field, and we used that instead of seeding that. We used that as mulch, and this is 2 years later with minimal irrigation, and the seed. One of the reasons that I wanted to try to do this, was because I didn't want the area right around the house to be really, really different than the area surrounding it, because the value of this place was the setting that it's in. And so not wanting to, detract from that by having and I could have, I actually started, when I was working on this project, I started putting together a seed list for recovering this area, and I thought, why don't we just try and mow this seed bank that's already there and use it as mulch and see what happens. And it worked really well, and I've tried it several times. If you can talk somebody into doing it, it actually usually works really well. So I kind of will close with this sentiment, that adaptability is going to be being flexible as humans, is going to be one of our greatest, I guess, skills in learning to deal with what's happening climate wise. You can have really deep roots like the like the yucca in the center of the image here. And or you can have more shallow roots, but and be a more seasonal plant like the grasses in this image. And actually the combination of the two is probably the best, because you wind up having a really being able to, the deep rooted plants are the plants that are going to be able to survive the kind of roll with the punches, that are going to be able to survive whatever the crazy hot summers and then plunging cold temperatures in the wintertime. And then the filler in between, are plants that maybe are transitional, that you can actually change those over time to be more adaptable. I think the thing that gave me hope in when I first started realizing what we were in for with climate change, is that plants can be significantly genetically different in 3 generations. And so, with grasses, that's every year, practically. And any of the, even with desert willow, a desert willow that was grown from seed can be more heat and drought tolerant than its grandparents are. So if we allow the plants to actually evolve in place, and part of the reason that the Southwest is so wealthy in that regard is that we have so many different niches for plants to adapt to. So the plants here have always been really elastic in their adaptability. If we take advantage of that and we stick close to home, in relatively close to home, for the basis of what our landscapes are, I think we'll be way ahead of the game 10 years from now, when it's even hotter and hopefully not any more dry, but it'll feel more dry because the evaporation rate will be so much higher. So anyway, that's my hope for the future, and I think it's hope in the plants. I think that's the place to put our trust.
Well, Judith, thank you so much. That was fantastic. I really learned a lot today, and really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. Just a reminder for our guests that are here today, this slide has some of our contact information. As a final reminder, we have everything that we need for those of you that qualify for the rebate. And in a couple of days, we will send out a follow-up email that will have many of the resources we mentioned today, as well as any information that Judith would like to pass along to you. So again, thank you so much, Judith. Thank you everyone for attending and your interest in conserving water and water-wise landscaping. Thanks.